Hey everyone, welcome to Vertical Blocks. Thanks for tuning in. So today, it's myself and Nick, who I think you in the community know very, very well. He's been around for a while, in the Fantom community and in other communities. And so I'm here having a conversation with Nick, answering some of his questions. Maybe I have some questions for him as well. And really, I'm interested in getting his thoughts on how he sees kind of the Fantom ecosystem, the Fantom Foundation, especially at this kind of pivotal point in time. So Nick, thank you very much for joining us on Vertical Blocks.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been following the Fantom ecosystem for over 2 years. It's actually a chain where I spent a disproportionate amount of my time at certain points over the last 2 years. So it's a chain that's close to my heart. But a really rough couple of months, 3 months, for both yourself and I know both yourself and the foundation and users of Fantom. So I just wanted to, have a conversation with you around, what happens next. So just in the interest of full disclosure, I've never received any form of payment from the Fantom Foundation, including for doing this show. I've got no active long or short positions on the FTM token right now. That could change next week. Those that know me know that I change my mind quickly and often. My company, Revelo Intel, has never had a commercial relationship with the foundation. Michael and I have never done, first time we've spoken, we've done no prep work for the interview. He hasn't seen the list of questions or comments I have. Nor he nor the foundation have asked for any concessions in terms of what we can or can't talk about. So I thank both Michael and the foundation for the opportunity to pull on a few threads as it relates to the future of the Fantom ecosystem. Now, with that out of the way, I've been both critical and supportive of the foundation at various times over the 2 years, sometimes warranted, sometimes unwarranted. And most of you listening would agree that I'm an independent market participant. I just try to call it as I see it, and I'm generally interested in a path forward for Fantom. The chain is an absolute pleasure to use from a technical standpoint. It's really fast, it's really cheap, and I would like to think that there is a path forward. So let's just talk about a brief summary. I don't want to litigate the events of the past as it relates to Multichain, but let's have some context here. I've listened to all the communications out of the foundation, including all the podcasts you've been on over the last 4 or 5 weeks, Michael, including the latest one with Andre Cronje on the block. And from what I've surmised, the Chinese police, or some faction of the Chinese police, was tracking some nefarious on-chain activity related to some kind of fraud, scam, or whatever it was. Those tokens end up in multi-chain contracts. Potentially, these authorities don't understand how bridge technology works. They identify and detain the founder of Multichain, Zhao Zhen, on suspicion of somehow being involved or in some attempt to get the money frozen. In any event, that was kind of a perfect storm of events that led to that. The multi-chain team then gives everyone assurances that everything can run smoothly without the CEO, both privately and publicly to different market participants. The Fantom Foundation does some investigating and sees that the bridge is working, transactions are flowing, and they repeat those assurances publicly. It turns out this guy lied to everybody, including the foundation and potentially multi-chain team members, and he had backdoor access to the entire system. The Chinese police used that backdoor access and drained all the funds. Roughly 220 million was involved, 60 to 70 million being on the Fantom side, with over 20 chains also being affected. Fantom was the chain that was most affected, but there were a lot of other market participants that were involved here. Circle and Tether then manages to freezes roughly $60 million worth of the lost funds. So that's a good result. And the foundation has since, at its own expense, engaged legal assistance from a firm with experience and contacts in China in an attempt to gain information, clarify information, and potentially recruit the funds. Users on Fantom have lost tens of millions. TVL on the chain has dropped from 350 million on May the 1st to about 50 million, 55 million today. And by all accounts, from a reputational standpoint, the Fantom ecosystem is in somewhat of a crisis. Now, did I miss anything there? Is that a pretty good summary of how we ended up here?
I'd say that's a pretty decent summary. I'd say that, the biggest shock, I think, to us at the Fantom Foundation, and I think it's a similar shock to other chains and projects outside of Fantom that use multi-chain, because remember, it wasn't just Fantom chain that used multi-chain. Obviously, multi-chain advertised they connected to over 90 plus other chains, right? And many other projects that were not deployed on Fantom. The biggest shock to us, I think, is, as you mentioned, this personal cloud access by Zalgen, because that was not clearly what was stated publicly in the past. And so, multi-chain came out on the 14th of July, 2023 in their tweet, and they said, since the beginning of the project, Zalgen has had personal access to all of the funds on multi-chain. But if you go to their documentation and you look at the prior what they put out publicly and privately, they've always said, MPC security top in mind. We even have a bug bounty that says that if you can prove that someone has single access to all the funds, you can earn up to $2 million. So that was the biggest shock to us. And also, multi-chain had 14, they had advertised that they had 14 audits done on their technology, right? Some of it on, the smart contract, some of it on the NPC, some of it on other things. And no one was able to pick out that Zalgen had, quote, personal cloud access, right? And, so that I think raises questions for everyone going forward as to okay, when you're using any sort of technology, including a bridge, how do you assure yourself that there isn't this backdoor personal cloud access? And that's sort of a difficult thing to kind of figure out for a number of reasons. But I think that's very important to illustrate. That really is the crux of the entire problem that's happened right now, is this personal access. Because if multi-chain was really running on multiple different servers around the world via these MPC nodes, what is known as multi-party control, then I think the events that have played out with users' funds disappearing wouldn't have occurred. Another thing I want to mention about the user funds moving around is that, for a period of time, they were just moved off the multi-chain bridge to 6 or 7 external wallet addresses and just sitting there. But now we know on the on-chain transaction that they've been moved across many different wallets, different chains, into some exchanges as well. I don't know who's doing that. If it's the police, if it's Zalgen, if it's, some nefarious actor, outside of those two, I'm not really sure. But what we do know is that obviously there have been funds moving around, and that is, a concern for us and a concern for others that we've been speaking to.
Yeah. It certainly doesn't appear like a hack. The money be gone. And Andre made the point on August 9th, when you both appeared together, that no one knew that this guy had this access, because if they did know that he had control of a couple $100 million, then his personal safety would be at risk, right? Someone would have made a move on this guy, and it's really as simple as that. So it really sounds like he just kept it a secret for whatever reason, and unfortunately, the worst case scenario occurred where he was detained and was forced to give up the access, and here we are. Now, I don't really want to spend any time pointing fingers and litigating who is to blame for all of this. I mean, you've discussed it at length previously, and it seems very clear that there are questions left unanswered. I just want to focus on what happens next. There's enough to talk about in terms of where we are now and how things can move forward on a number of different fronts. So let's spend some time talking about that. And for the purpose of this discussion, let's just assume that the multi-chain funds never get returned, right? Let's just assume that those efforts are exhausted. Everyone does their best. But that's a dead end, just for the sake of, focusing on what happens next. Let's remove that pathway from the discussion. Now, before we get into that and we wade into the jungle, I want to zoom out for a little bit. The Fantom Foundation is a private company. It's not a charity. And unlike other foundations, it was not around during the founding of Fantom. We don't need to go and rehash, the genesis of Fantom. But the foundation was created after the fact. It bought the FTM that it owns after the fact. It didn't just print FTM out of thin air. And I'd like for you just to clarify, as it stands today, what is the mandate of the Fantom Foundation? What mandate have you set for yourselves? Why does it exist? And what is its function? Like, what are you here to do? Let's just put that out on the table, because it will instruct us on how we answer or how we discuss the following questions.
So just to correct a couple of things that you mentioned, right? You mentioned that the Fantom Foundation came after the initial coin offering that took place or concluded on the 15th of June 2018, right? In fact, the Fantom Foundation came before that, right? So it was registered on the 7th of June 2018, right? So it was the entity that received or ultimately received the ICO funds, FTM tokens, etc. Right. Another point I want to mention is that the Fantom Foundation is what's known technically as a foundation company. Right, is a type of legal structure that's unique to the Cayman Islands. The foundation structure, foundation company, is neither just a completely private company, nor is it just like a pure foundation, right? And so what it means is that the Fantom Foundation is kind of run like a company, right? So you have directors, and directors have obligations to the company, and how a normal company works, right? Whether it's public or private. But it's also a foundation in the sense that there's a mandate concerning what the funds for the Fantom Foundation should be used for, and you can't pay out a dividend, right? So the people who control the foundation are not entitled to the principles in the foundation itself. It doesn't wholly belong to them. You can't just pay out a dividend. You're not supposed to just pay out a dividend to the shareholders or the controlling people, right? So it sort of acts as kind of like a foundation and hybrid private company, right? So to answer your question about the mandate, the mandate has always been for the Fantom Foundation to grow and develop the Fantom ecosystem, right? And so what do we mean by that? We mean working on the technology. Obviously, you need that technology there in order to get the users. So that's all the distributed ledger, the newer technology we've got coming with the virtual machine and storage system, APIs, etc. Everything that you need for developers to build applications and users be able to use those applications on the Fantom network. And then it's also on the demand side about, engaging in, marketing, business development in order to get users to, be able to use the Fantom chain such that, it just continues to grow and develop as the sort of open source ecosystem. So that really is the general mandate, and, happy to go into more details about, how we kind of achieve that mandate, but that's sort of the setup at a basic level, shall we say.
Yeah. Thanks for correcting me. That wasn't clear to me. It sounds like a hybrid structure where it can function as a company, but it still needs to adhere to the specified mandate about how the funds are used. Yeah. So there are restrictions legally on what the foundation can do with the funds. Okay, so that's instructive. And okay, so to grow and advance the Fantom, grow and develop the Fantom ecosystem, both from a technical level, from a adoption level, etc., etc. Now, you've been the CEO for several years, from what I understand. And has that mandate changed at all during that time, or the mission? Whether it's superficial wording or whether the way that you guys are actually operating?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the overall mandate that I just laid out, it hasn't changed, from the beginning. Because obviously the way that we've tried to achieve the mandate has changed dramatically. You kind of alluded to, how the Fantom Foundation originally, or at least most of the personnel used to be in Korea, but then there was a whole issue with the technology at the time not being real as was advertised to myself and other people. And so we had to step in for a number of reasons, to try and develop on the original technology. And a lot of that work was due to Andre. and essentially he is very, very important in how he kind of came back from that situation. So, circumstances changed in terms of achieving the mandate, but the mandate broadly has kind of like remained the same.
Okay. All right. Good. So at least we know, through what lens both yourself and Andre and the rest of the foundation are operating from, in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And to your point, the way you try and achieve those things is a moving target. Like, that is going to oscillate depending on situations and personnel and where you are in the life cycle of the project. But the mandate has remained, the mission has remained the same. Okay, good. Now, on August 9th, when you and Andre appeared on the block, you said that at that stage, you couldn't verify a lot of the information that you'd been told by Multichain or others, and that the foundation was on a mission to verify as much as you can. At that stage on August 9th, a couple of weeks ago, you were able to verify that the Chinese police had detained the CEO of Multichain, and that you really couldn't verify too much more than that in terms of what he was being detained for, what the charges were or anything like that. Has there been any new information that you've been able to actually verify since that point in time that you'd like to share?
So you are correct in that we have received confirmation from the Congolese police that Zhao Zhen is actually detained, right? And we're actually engaging with his counsel, right? But in terms of like, what charges or what the allegations are, that sort of thing, we don't have details of that yet, right? But there is some sort of investigation going on, and the Multichain team have also told us previously that it was not just Zhao Zhen who was detained; there were several people who have been detained, right? So I can't really say anything more than that for the time being, simply because we don't really know. But we are engaging with the Congolese police for sure, and we are telling them that these funds are not owned by, or our understanding is that the vast majority of these funds are not controlled by or owned by Chinese nationals. They're actually from foreigners located all around the world. And what they've sort of like indicated is they would like to see, evidence or have a better understanding about like who these funds belong to, where do they come from, that sort of thing. So we are communicating with them on that sort of basis.
Yep. Okay. It's difficult to try and understand how the legal system works in China. I've had no experience over there. I'd imagine getting information is somewhat difficult, especially when it relates to a situation that involves crypto. Okay. Also on August 9th, Andre suggested that in his view, it's unlikely for this to be resolved in less than a year. Has that thinking changed at all in the last 2 weeks? I would assume no, but I'm asking the question anyway.
So Andre did say, did make a comment like that. But what was like not more widely reported is also like the comment that I made immediately after his, right? Which is like, yes, the legal processes can take a while. However, it's very unpredictable, particularly in China, at least from what we've been able to see, right? Technically...
Yeah, he could get released. There's a number of ways that it gets resolved.
He will get released quickly at any point in time, right? Because it's pretty clear to us that Zhao Zhen hasn't actually been formally arrested at the moment, right? Our understanding is there hasn't been formal charges, right? So, the legal process could take, a year or so, as Andre mentioned. It could be a lot shorter than that. It's just like very unpredictable, right? What we do know, however, as I've made public before, is that there are a number of investigative authorities that are closely looking at the situation that we are talking to, right? So definitely it's not the case that no one, is not paying attention to this and it's just something that's happening in China and, people don't really care about it. No, I think a lot of people care about it worldwide because obviously it's affected a lot of users worldwide. I don't know. I think that's what maybe makes the case a bit different from other Chinese crypto cases that have happened in the past. I've noticed like other people have talked about a variety of different like projects in China where the team or someone from the team has apparently been detained. My understanding, and I'm just speaking in general here, and this is just speculation, my understanding of some of those projects is that it was largely dealing with local money, like local Chinese national money, right? Whereas in the multi-chain case, I think it's very, very different. I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of the funds were not from local Chinese, is on local Chinese money. It is international money from many, many different countries. So I think that's a differentiating factor in the multi-chain apparent detainment situation versus other Chinese projects where individuals have allegedly been detained.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there are certain scenarios where it does get resolved a lot sooner. Okay.
But I'm not saying that it is going to happen like good to be fair. I'm saying it's unpredictable.
Yeah. It certainly, so there are various scenarios that could play out. My question was more like, has anything changed in the last couple of weeks? And it sounds like that there isn't anything that you can disclose.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely receive a bit more information, not just with regards to the Communist police, but like outside as well. But like, unfortunately, at this stage, I can't really like talk about it too much.
Understood. All right, let's move on to what we think can happen next and what we hope can happen next. Now, for a blockchain to succeed, it needs a number of different things, but primarily what it needs is protocols to build on it and create products and services that people want to use, and then users to come and transact on those protocols. You've got the supply, if we call the protocols the supply side of the equation, and the users as the demand side of the equation. You need both of those. Now, from your position at the Fantom Foundation, what is the Foundation's view about which side of that equation the Foundation's efforts and resources are best deployed? Are you focusing on the supply side? You're focusing on the demand side? Naturally, you're trying to do both, but is there a focus on one or the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the kind of the way that I like to think about supply and demand, right, for a network is that the supply is like the capacity of the network to be able to handle transactions and how well does it handle transactions, right? And that really has to do with the technology, because obviously, if you don't have any working technology, you can't have users because they have nothing to use. So there's a product component, which I call like the supply side, right? The demand side has to do with, users, protocols coming to the chain. Because obviously, if you just develop, the technology in the platform, but there are like many protocols and many users, you're not really like having a growing ecosystem, right? So you kind of need both. You need like, users, protocols, developers, as well as like the technology, right? So talking about more so like the users and the protocols, what we are primarily focusing on is like supporting developers, right? Because if we have, a great, many protocols, some really good protocols that, can appeal to users' demand, that will like help grow the ecosystem overall, right? And so in order to have like a lot of users on the demand side, you need to have the protocols, right? So very much like our business development has very much been focused on developers. So there are a lot of initiatives that we've released recently and also in the past around, direct a grants program like we had at the end of 2021, which didn't work out for a number of reasons and was kind of a mistake. We also had Bitcoin grants rounds coming out. We also had the Vault ecosystem program, and we also have gas monetization program, right? As well as like a number of hackathons that were prized and sponsored by the Fantom Foundation that have occurred as well in the past that will continue to occur going forward into the future. So all of these programs are geared towards getting developers incentivized and encouraged to deploy on Fantom, right? And I can go into the details about those aspects, but we believe that if we're able to get projects to deploy on Fantom that are popular, not only, will the project developers themselves benefit by making, more FTM and encourage them to get more users on board, but them encouraging to get more users on board is great for the network because that generates transaction fees in the end, right? And in our opinion, sustainable network, whether it's to do with Fantom or any like other like blockchain out there, is a network that can generate fees over a period of time, right? And it's fees that are sufficient enough to satisfy the demand of validators, because validators obviously need to get paid for their efforts in validating the transactions on the network. But then enough fees also get generated such that, you know, developers get a proportion of those fees that encourages them to get more users on board, right? And the users benefit because they're using applications on the network they want to be using for whatever benefit, whether it's in the DeFi space or NFT space or whatever it might be. But the cost per transaction for each user is low. But in aggregate, the fees are very high. That's the sort of sweet spot that you want to be in. And that's why you need both to be working on the supply side as well as the demand side.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pull on that thread a little bit. I'm a fan of the construct of the gas monetization program. That makes a ton of sense. I'm surprised more blockchains don't do it for the reasons that you've outlined. I think the framework for such a program is sound. However, and sure, there could be some shortcomings with it. You know, some people might build inefficient, you know, gas kind of contracts. I don't care about all that. I think the free market kind of works all that out in the end. So, in summary, I like that particular program. However, in a competitive landscape, right, which you operate in, we all operate in, with layer ones, layer twos, all competing for the developers that Fantom wants to focus on. And maybe this is where we disagree. And maybe we can have a little bit of to and fro here. Fantom has an uphill battle on two fronts. The first front is that it needs to regain the trust of existing protocols. And I'm sure, you know, you're in these discussions. Teams on Fantom are extremely unhappy with the situation. And like, I know a lot of these projects. So I'm not an investor in any of them. I'm not part of any team. I'm not coming at this from any kind of vested interest. But when they talk to the foundation, I can only imagine that the conversation is kind of like, help us get out of this mess. Give us some free money. Help us along. And the foundation, correctly so, is trying to balance the amount of funding that they can provide so they can do it in a sustainable and responsible way. So you've kind of got this tug of war between protocols want funding, foundation needs to disperse funds in a responsible way. So because the current situation, trust has been lost with these existing protocols, and they've had to accelerate their moves, you know, to cross-chain deployments, which they may have done in any event, regardless. Number two is attracting new protocols to build on Fantom. With the current backdrop, with the multi-chain mess and, you know, TVL and activity and fees are all kind of falling off a cliff, it's difficult to attract new protocols. So the point I'm trying to make is the programs that the foundation has worked on and put out over the last 6, 9, 12 months make a lot of sense. And I think in a normalized environment, gain traction where you've got volumes, you have activity, you have new users coming in. But in the current situation that the network is in, where it's very difficult to get anyone new to try the network, and the people that are trying the network have either lost money in USDC or for whatever reason, it is a situation that is inorganic, right? You could call it a crisis or whatever, like it doesn't matter how you label it. But with that backdrop and that overhang, it's surprising to me that the foundation hasn't come up with kind of emergency measures, if you like, to try and neutralize this negative overhang that exists, to give the network a boost so that that flywheel can restart. Does that make sense, the construct I'm trying to present? That under normal circumstances, the programs that you have would be successful. In the current situation, they're either going to take a really long time to take off, or they may not take off, because most of the programs that you have deployed rely on network activity. gas monetization, you get a cut of the gas that is used on your DApp. There's no users on the network. There's no transactions being made. There's no cut that comes to the protocol. So kind of the flywheel works in reverse. I'm sure you guys have discussed this. What are your personal thinking about it?
Yeah, or just to be clear about the gas monetization, it's networks to do with individual protocols. It's not to do with the overall like Fantom network. So if an individual protocol is very popular, they own like a percentage of the fees they or their smart contracts generate directly, right? It doesn't go to another project.
It's not aggregated. I get it.
That being said, I understand where you're coming from when you talk about like emergency measures, but you also mentioned about the foundation has made the correct decision, not just to give out quote unquote like free money to whoever is asking for said free money, right? So what I'm kind of like curious about is it would be great if you could expand a bit more about these like emergency measures as you described them to me, because we're interested in hearing from a variety of different ideas from different people connected to Fantom ecosystem, also outside of that. So if you could elaborate a bit more about what you mean by that, that would be great.
Yeah. Look, I'll be honest. I've heard suggestions from a number of different projects, and you've probably heard them as well. I haven't heard anything that really struck me as a silver bullet that I said, yeah, that's a slam dunk. I would do that. So I don't really have all the answers, right? I don't know what a perfect emergency measure looks like. And that seems to be a problem that I'd like to see solved. I'm not smart enough to solve it. I'm sure there's some technical ways to do it. But I think just from a general market perspective, market participants look at that and they're like, well, nothing's really changed and it's difficult for the network to regain traction. So understand, I'm here presenting you with a problem, and then you've asked for, well, okay, what would you do? What solutions do you have? And I said, well, I don't really know. It's the truth, right? It's a really difficult problem to solve, and I certainly don't envy, you and the foundation being in the hot seat trying to solve it. But the fact does remain, Michael, that the current trajectory doesn't reverse itself. Something needs to occur, and we can talk a little bit offline about it, because I do have one or two ideas, but I don't just want to kind of regurgitate what other people have told me without thinking them through myself and deciding which ones make sense. So but yeah, you're right. Give us some solutions instead of just giving us problems is a very fair position to take, both with me and with the protocols that approach you guys. But is there anything that you guys are looking at within that category of potential emergency measures that does make sense, that you think may have some runway, may be able to get some traction? And are you considering doing anything like that sooner rather than later?
Yeah, so what we actually have been thinking about and actually starting to execute is giving some like grant money or support to a number of select projects, right? Not anyone that just comes to us and say, oh, can we have support for XYZ, right? Because obviously the risk there is that you can be taken advantage of, right? And we have been taken advantage of in the past, and that's sort of like what was a big problem of what happened with the incentive program that we launched towards the end of 2021, right? And the foundation using a lot of money that necessarily we shouldn't have lost, and we didn't really gain, or the Fantom network didn't really gain much from it, right? So there are a number of projects that we have been like, giving financial support to, right? And another kind of support, right? One of them, for example, and there was no announcement about it, but I'm just going to jump the gun a little bit, is, for example, S4 Kingdoms, right? Launched by the PaintSwap team, is my understanding, and working with others. S4 Kingdom is a quite nice project for the Fantom ecosystem, because we've kind of seen that they've done a lot of development on the gaming side. It's like an RPG game. They've done a lot of like announcements. There seems to be a lot of in-game features. It seems to be quite like a well-designed, put-together game that people within the Fantom Foundation have like interacted with, right? And it's been supported by, a long-standing marketplace in the Fantom ecosystem called PaintSwap. And, with PaintSwap, we help them with, be able to run servers, some API access, because, we have access to like discounted servers that can help like projects like them, so we can cover some of their like server costs. We're sponsoring one of their events that they've got coming out with S4 Kingdoms. And so, yeah, like we're directly supporting them because we know that, they're likely to be a more trustworthy partner than some like random project we've never heard of, like coming to the foundation, right? And they are generating like a decent amount of transaction on the network, because I can see that when I look at the transaction activity, right? So what we're looking at doing is more supporting projects that we sort of have established like trust or good relations with, right? And one of them is S4 Kingdoms. There's another like project out there that's quite well financed that we'll be integrating with Fantom, also on the NFT side. I can't really disclose the name at this point. That we're also like financially supporting in terms of like competitions and that sort of thing for them to gain traction, to help us gain more traction on the Fantom ecosystem itself, right? And it's a project that we're also like an investor in. So we're thinking about how do we expand the investments that were made in the past. How do we provide financial or non-financial support to projects out there that we believe are likely to not be rugs or anything like that, to develop well, to develop more so on Fantom, that sort of activity. So we are kind of going through like an internal vetting process as to like what those projects are. And just to give another example, obviously as a result of what happened from Multichain, there is no, to my understanding, there is no like real active lending and borrowing protocol at the moment, right? Well, I think maybe there is still Taro, but apart from that, there's no real active lending and borrowing protocol similar to like Geist or like Aave, right? So we are also talking to a number of teams that are looking to deploy a lending and borrowing protocol on the Fantom ecosystem using one of the other alternative bridges like Layer 0 or Axeler, or maybe both. And so, we might also be supporting a project like that. So there is more direct involvement from the foundation coming out on top of, the Gitcoin grants rounds and the Vault and the gas monetization and hackathons, which were activities that were already happening before, Multichain happened. So there is like activity happening in the background. And I encourage any project out there to kind of reach out to us and tell us like, what they're doing, how long they've been around, and how they can how they're looking to grow their base of users and transactions on the Fantom network itself, and we'll take a lot of interest in that.
Yeah, Michael, that approach seems quite reasonable and potentially very effective. If you can be surgical and precise with how you spend the money, then that's really interesting. I'll make 2 points here. The first one is, and this is kind of the antithesis of DeFi, right? But I'm a big proponent for internal vetting processes, right? I don't really like the decentralized way of deploying capital, right? It doesn't make sense to me. Smart people should sit in a room, and provided the incentives are aligned correctly, then they should be able to deploy capital a lot more efficiently than any other method. It's worked for hundreds of years. So as a foundation sits there, looking to stimulate activity on the network, has it been discussed that one way of deploying capital is to expand what you just mentioned, where instead of giving out grants, you actually deploy capital from an investment standpoint, and you act as somewhat of an investment committee, and you take some equity in the projects that you invest in? Is that a legal issue because of the structure of the foundation, or is it talk to us a little bit about that?
So the Fantom Foundation has in the past, not really recently for the past few months, to be honest, but definitely beyond that, the Fantom Foundation has taken direct stakes in a variety of different projects and companies, whether it's equity or token, vested tokens over time, seed rounds, etc. That has definitely occurred. As I mentioned before, there is an NFT project that is quite well known to us and to me personally. I know the team personally, that is looking to integrate with Fantom, right? And the Fantom Foundation has invested in 2 rounds, I believe, for that NFT project. So there's no legal restrictions on us making investments into any number of projects, whether they're crypto or non-crypto. I mean, we actually looked at this from a legal perspective a while ago before we started making these investments, and it was very clear to us that we were able to do it without basically any restrictions as far as I'm aware, right? So we are, we have been making investments into a number of projects on Fantom and also non-crypto investments. So, we would be interested in looking at doing that further, as I mentioned before, right? So, you've got the grant supporting projects that, the Fantom Foundation kind of thinks is quote unquote trustworthy, based on their history and the people that we know there. And also, the potential for investment as well, based on, that history of trust and, due diligence and that sort of thing. So we are also looking to deploy more capital as investment into projects on the Fantom ecosystem. Obviously that helps generate a return, but that also helps, grow and develop the ecosystem going forward. Another thing that we're doing that we actually have done in the past is also some of these DeFi protocols providing a liquidity, right? So, going in there, deploying funds into certain pools, etc., hoping to get the TVL out. So, obviously we took some TVL out as a result of the multi-chain, or prior to the multi-chain situation. But we can move TVL back in as well to help grow on the DeFi side.
Yeah, let me give you an idea, right? You might hate it, but it may be able to kill a couple of birds with one stone. So, the foundation, the Fantom ecosystem suffered, somewhat of reputational damage because of the events of the last few months. You need a way to attract new protocols. How about this? How about the foundation carves out, say, $5 million, right? Or $3 million, whatever, some small 7-figure amount that doesn't move the needle in terms of the treasury, and says, we're going to deploy this capital in terms of investments into projects, okay? Like what you've just described. But we're going to formalize it, and we're going to create a YouTube show called Fantom Shark Tank, right? Pick a better name than Fantom Shark Tank. You put Andre up there, who's a character, and isn't going to mince words, right? It could be the DeFi Mark Cuban. You run this show and you say, we're going to put up $3 million and we're going to fund 10 projects for 300 grand each over a 10-week period. You produce the show, and now you have this marketing arm that creates a ton of interest in the Fantom ecosystem. You get a lot of new builders that maybe don't have the negative overhang of what's happened on Fantom earlier this year, now being interested, putting together a pitch, wanting to be on the show because they want their own, their own stage and to show what they've got. You end up getting 300 applications. You fund the best 10 projects, cost you $3 million. It'll cost you millions of dollars just to get that kind of marketing activity. I think you free roll on the marketing and you end up deploying some capital. And maybe that, creates a lot of positivity around the network and the foundation and kickstart something new. I'd love to see something like that. And if you don't do it, I'm sure some other chain is going to end up doing it because I think it's a free roll.
Yeah, I actually think that's a very neat idea. Yeah. So that's something that I actually kind of raised internally. I think for a number of reasons, it's a great idea. It's kind of a unique format. It hasn't been done before. People kind of like the Shark Tank format, as applied outside of crypto, because obviously it's a very popular show in many different countries. And also because it allows us to help vet these projects and make investments into it. And obviously we make right investments. It's not just great for the network, it's also great for the Fantom Foundation's treasury as a whole. So that is definitely a good idea. And you mentioned before, immediately before you talked about the idea that I might not like it, but just my initial impression is that I actually quite like it indeed. Yeah,
you guys should talk about it. You could expand it. You could say, well, we won't do it on our own, right? We'll do it with Avalanche and Polygon, right? And we'll do this combined show with mass production. And instead of it being a $3 million pot, it's a $10 million pot. and you got, representatives from each chain on, there are ways to make this thing awesome. The reason I came up with it is because very recently I had a meeting with someone in crypto, and some big influencers around crypto who aren't really taken very seriously, but have huge audiences. I won't mention any names because, we're not here to dunk on anyone. But let's say people with a lot less status in the industry than someone like Andre or yourself are doing this, and they're doing it on regular television. So they're doing a crypto Shark Tank type show. It's not a secret. Several people know about it. But it's going to do really well, even though you have these non-crypto native individuals that just happen to be great marketers, making the investments. I'd really like to see people with technical backgrounds, making the investments. So it's certainly not a unique idea that no one's come up with before. And I think we might end up in a situation in 3 years where all major chains run a particular program like this. So I'd encourage you to talk about it. I'm happy to help if you want me to. You may need a number of different, judges, if you like. I'll put my hand up for that. But anyway, that'll be a really positive development. All right. Now, I'm just going through my notes here. Okay. Let's talk about the foundation's runway. You've mentioned previously that the foundation, lost a few $1 million, low 7 digits, basically on the multi-token, did not have any exposure. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but I couldn't find anything about the foundation having exposure to USDC on Fantom. So you only incurred the loss on the multi-tokens, nothing on the bridged assets. Do I have that right? That's the case?
We did actually suffer some losses in the bridge assets, but they were not there was a small proportion compared to like how much we lost on the value of the multi-token, right? So the value of the multi-token, obviously depending on where you look at the price and that sort of thing, it would have been at least a little while before late May 2023. It would have been, the losses would have been to the tune of millions of dollars for sure, yeah. And we did lose some bridge assets as well, but it would have been it's a fraction of that, like several.
Okay. Yeah. So we can say that the foundation all in lost less than $5 million, less than $4 million. It's a low 7.
Well, depending on the price of where you look at it and stuff, it could have been like a lot more than that. But definitely like in the millions of dollars on the value of the mortgage, unfortunately.
All right. So, you also mentioned that hasn't really moved the needle in terms of the runway that the foundation has. And, a couple of people tried to pin you down. Well, do you have 30 years? Do you have 40 years? And you're like, well, we have enough, right? So builders in the space and market participants that I talk to are calling for the foundation to clarify its current financial position and runway in a verifiable way. Now, my reaction to this was, look, these guys are a private company. They're under no obligation to give the market a running commentary of their finances or their investment activities, even in a time of crisis. And that was my view. A colleague suggested to me, and this didn't occur to me at the time, but suggested that because the foundation used the runway as a marketing tool, right? Andre wrote the article. I even made a video about it. It was great. No other foundation or organization in DeFi had written such an article at that time. It was great. It really gave us an inside look into, how the finances of the foundation were managed. But let's call it what it was. It was a really good marketing tool because as a builder, you look at that and you say, these guys are super well capitalized. They know how to manage their bankroll. And if I build on that chain, I can be sure that they're going to be around in 3 years. Right? So it was a very effective marketing tool. Now, because it was used as a marketing tool, and now we're in this situation where there are questions around runway and there's questions around funding and all these other things, that potentially my view that the foundation is under no obligation to provide verifiable clarity on the finances may be incorrect. And that if it's good if the disclosures are good when times are good, then maybe that should also be disclosed when times are tough. I assume you guys have had this discussion internally. I think from an optics standpoint, and I'm not advocating that you guys do this, there's probably legal reasons and a number of other reasons why this is a shitty idea. But have you discussed internally the pros and cons of, putting out in the public domain some verifiable data showing that you guys are very well capitalized and whatever's happened with Multichain does not affect your plans, your resources for the network? From an optics standpoint, that would certainly be a positive. Is that something that's possible legally, technically?
Yeah. So as we discussed internally, and I think I made this public as well, the Fantom Foundation is preparing financial statements for an audit that's occurring on the 2021 calendar year, right? Which may or may not be actually required under Cayman law. And as a result of that audit, we could publish, potentially, and I look at how the laws work in the Cayman Islands and, discuss internally, potentially publish the whole audit or, the segment of it or some sort of attestation, right? But that's for 2021, right? We're going by
pretty updated
2023. You could do an attestation right now, for, any point in time, right? As any company can, right? We actually have a lot more transparency out there than other layer ones or layer twos already, right? Because there are a number of Fantom Foundation wallets that are publicly labeled on EtherScan and FTM Scan and potentially elsewhere, right? And I don't know of any other, layer one or so-called layer two out there or blockchain project that has that sort of level of transparency already, right? So people can go in and see those sorts of wallets. And honestly, we were already a little bit hesitant about doing that, right? And the reason why is because, you don't want people to front run you, right? Or you don't want people to think, oh, because the foundation has been buying a certain token or asset, that somehow the value should stop, or we have some sort of secret knowledge or anything like that. We're just not the case, right? Because that creates a number of potential problems, right? So there is kind of a balancing act here, as to how much should you show or shouldn't you show, because at the same time you don't want to portray the Fantom Foundation as sort of having the same or pointing themselves out there as they have the same requirements as a publicly listed company, right? Because that also comes with some legal potential or discussions or issues, right? So I think a fair way to go about it is to maybe think about some sort of attestation or release some sort of further details, or although there's already a whole bunch of wallets that are already out there, right? So I don't.
They're good points.
Yeah, I don't really have the answer off the top of my head, and I know it sounds like I'm kind of sidestepping around it.
No, I think your answer is perfectly fine. I mean, look, even in traditional financial markets, you don't find out what a hedge fund does until they lodge a 13F, and they're not required to do that in real time. You find out after the fact.
Yeah, exactly.
To prevent front running. And, I just think that we're somewhat spoiled in DeFi that, these things can be viewed in real time. And the fact that you have some wallets out there, which I haven't looked today, but there's tens of millions of dollars in there that people can view in real time is a lot more transparency than I have in Apple. And I own shares in Apple. So, yeah, no, I think your answer is perfectly fine. But anything that you can do after the fact, right, to ensure that you can't get front run or anything like that, or some kind of attestation, I think certainly calms the market down a little bit. Especially, remember, we're not in a normalized situation right now, right? Under a normal scenario, this wouldn't be an issue, but it has been brought up several times that well, do they actually have all the money that they say they? How do we know they didn't lose 30 million in USDC? So these are reasonable questions for people to ask. And anything you guys can do to kind of alleviate those concerns, whether warranted or not, by the way, would benefit the ecosystem as a whole. But anyway, all right, let's move on. You mentioned,
or if people
gone.
Well, I'd say, rather than the onus of proof being on us to prove, that we didn't lose a certain amount of money, right? Perhaps the onus of proof should be on individuals who will say, oh, the foundation lose, 10 million or however amount of money on like Multichain, for them to come out and say, okay, here's the actual evidence that like demonstrates it, right? Because if someone is making sort of a claim about like, how much we're supposedly lost, right? And then I've seen some like outrageous numbers, even a number that exceeded how much like the Multichain loss actually was overall, right? Which is just ridiculous. I wouldn't name the Twitter person, but someone posted something like that. A very simple question is like, okay, if you say the foundation, lost $10 million, you think you lost $10 million on USDC or whatever it might be, just show the evidence about like where you're trying to draw that conclusion from, right? Because if you look at, for example, the ones we've already put out there, you will see that there has been quite a big loss in terms of the value of the multi-token, right? Some of them were multi-tokens that were in Uniswap pool and like multi-ETH. Some of them are multi-tokens that were locked up in the multi-chain protocol itself. So you can see that when I'm saying that we have lost a lot of money on the value of the multi-token, that is definitely true. That coincides with what is evidence on-chain, right? But if people are going to say, oh, but you're hiding all these other losses, well, the blockchain's there, right? You can see all the transactions going into, any swap, going out of any swap, then just like, present the sort of evidence, right? Or shut up, right? Like put up or shut up. So that's what I would say to people.
Was it, Michael, you're 100% right. Okay. And it's a perfectly reasonable position to take. And one that I would probably take if I was sitting on your side of the desk. However, the world we live in, unfortunately, sometimes doesn't work like that, especially in crypto.
Yeah, I know.
Where, perception is everything, and narratives can be built out of fabricated information, incorrect information, inaccurate information. So I agree with you, right? But the point still does stand that if it's legally possible and other issues that may arise can be neutralized, more transparency to shut up those rumors would benefit the ecosystem as a whole. But I 100% agree with you. I'm not saying that that just because someone comes up with some outlandish claim, any organization or individual should feel the need to defend any of that stuff, right? Because that's all you'd end up doing all day. However, there are times where it may make sense to play that game because the means justifies the ends.
Yeah.
You understand.
Like, how it works in digital finance is usually the reporting comes out, sometime like well after like, the actual like specific date, right? And if we release information, for example, about the audit that's happening in 2021, as I mentioned before, obviously that would be, about what happened in the past compared to like what's happened like more recently, right? So I just want to be that with, make that clear to people. Some of these like reports do take time, and there's like certainly issues we're discussing internally about it. So, having like real time, attestations or, reporting and that sort of thing is not really possible. It's not realistic. And it's something that doesn't even happen, as you mentioned, like in the traditional finance world, outside of crypto anyway, whether the company's
Yeah, no, you're right. All right, let's move on. Now, you mentioned publicly a few weeks ago that from a marketing standpoint, your view and the general view at the foundation is that there is a lot of improvement that can occur and needs to occur on the marketing side. As a result of that view, you are close to hiring a new CMO. How is that progressing? Is that deal going to be done?
Yeah, so we have hired the new CMO. He started his job on Monday, just 2 days ago. He hit the ground running, talking to a lot of the people within the team. Is looking to put together like a solid plan going forward. He's someone who has background in a lot of background outside of crypto, particularly in the entertainment industry, in the gaming industry, that sort of thing. He is someone who previously had quite a senior role at TikTok until recently. I'm not going to name the name now at the moment because there actually are a few media articles potentially going out, is my understanding. But he has a great background, and he has a background that we kind of need in the Fantom team, because one of the things that we're lacking is sort of that marketing experience outside of just crypto itself, right? So if we wanted to bring someone into the organization that had that sort of extensive experience outside of crypto, dealing with a variety of different situations, and explain to him, okay, like, this is the lay of the land for Fantom. This is what we're looking to achieve. Can you help take some of your experience and apply it to Fantom? So the marketing guy has already started, and there'll be further details about him coming out. And he'll definitely, I've talked to him about it, he definitely will be, taking a public role, as he should be, as, the chief marketing officer. He will be, conducting interviews. He will be talking on behalf of the foundation, and he'll be laying out, like, I hope to be like a pretty solid marketing plan for us going forward. So I'm very encouraged by this individual joining us.
Good. And okay, does that mean that Simone is moving on? I understand he was the previous CMO.
Yeah, so we had discussions internally, and Simone will be leaving Fantom. I believe his last day will be on the 2nd of September. So he's just wrapping up a few things, but Simone will be moving on, and the new marketing individual will be taking over his prior role as chief marketing officer.
Okay. You mentioned, I had a question here about what areas have you specifically identified as lacking on marketing? You mentioned one in terms of a broader range of experience outside of DeFi and trying to connect the dots with, other industries, etc. Is there anything else that you guys have identified as being low-hanging fruit from the marketing front that you would like, that you have decided that the new guy is going to go after? I mean, it's okay if you can't answer now. I mean, he could probably speak for himself in a couple of weeks when he gets announced. But I thought I'd ask the question anyway.
Yeah. So we've kind of like left it open-ended for the new CMO to join, right? We've told him about some of the ideas that we've had, and these ideas that we're kind of like, already expressed on the podcast. So like talking about, we've talked to him about gas monetization, the Vault program, hackathons we've got coming out, Gitcoin grants round and what that is all about, as well as other ideas about directly like giving grants and support to projects in the Fantom ecosystem. So those are sort of ideas that he's evaluating and looking through, and that we're planning to keep doing going forward. In terms of other ideas he might have, that's something that he is actively looking into at the moment. So again, he just joined 2 days ago, so I think it's like
give him some time,
all the answers and and have an extensive document about it. But he is very well aware of the Fantom Foundation. We have talked to him for several months, so he's quite already like knowledgeable about the crypto industry, about the Fantom Foundation, about Fantom ecosystem and how it fits into the whole space. And so he is actively evaluating different marketing opportunities that may be out there. Not just with the existing projects on chain, but also potentially Web2 companies that he has a lot of connections with as well. So I think if we give him a bit of time, maybe a couple of weeks, he'll have a lot more solid ideas. And I would really like for him to come on, maybe speak with you, speak with other people, and just be public about it and say, hey, these are sort of the marketing ideas I'm thinking about. This is sort of the plan that I have in mind. What do people think about it as well, right? So definitely he will be very much public facing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Happy to talk to him. Makes sense that, needs some time to get his feet under him. I heard you mention that a rebranding may be on the cards. Obviously, this individual, will have an integral part if that decision is made, and then how to pull that off. Difficult to execute a rebrand, right? Historically, they generally don't work. Sometimes they do, but it's a hard ask. So that will be a hell of a job to try and execute. Is there anything that you want to disclose now? I know you don't have to, but anything you can disclose around, what a rebranding might look like, or whether that's just a dead end? Do you have anything new there?
Yeah. So we are discussing quite extensively internally about potential rebrand for Fantom, and that's something that the new marketing guy has been aware of. and I talked to Andre quite a bit about it. Because at this stage, what we're kind of thinking about is like a new name for Fantom, like a new logo, a new set of like branding, as well as potentially launching like a new chain with the new technology we've got coming out, right? So with the new technology we've got coming out, we actually might be able to take the existing network and not even do a hard fork to upgrade to the new storage system and the new virtual machine, which, dramatically reduces storage, dramatically increases throughput. And we've got a public testnet coming out, aiming for October at the moment, right? And then, rolling to a mainnet. So if we are thinking about potentially starting a new chain from scratch, it's using a lot of the existing like data that we have, or some of the existing data that we have on the current chain, just because there are a number of like technology benefits to doing that. Obviously, that's quite risky though, and that comes with potential downsides. So we haven't finalized any sort of decision in terms of like a rebranding from both a marketing perspective and a technology perspective. But it is something that we are discussing quite extensively internally. It's not something that would necessarily make a decision on very quickly, because it would be a big move to do such a rebranding, even just on the marketing side itself. But it is something that, if it were to happen, would likely happen probably several months from now. So not anything that's going to happen, next week or 2 weeks or even a month away from now.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
We do have a few names in mind, but I'm not going to mention them yet.
Yeah, I don't think the name is the variable of success. But I don't know if it'll work. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. In DeFi, we see, projects, small projects, right? dApps, rebrand, teams move from one failed project, start a new one, kind of seamlessly. I don't think Fantom can fall into that category just because of its size and its history. It's been around for a while. You guys are all doxed. Everybody knows who you guys are. So I don't know. It'll certainly be an interesting, case study if you do decide to go down that path, as to the decisions that need to be made along the way and whether it ultimately succeeds or not. One thing I just thought of though, in the rebrands outside of crypto, such a nascent industry, we don't really have very many case studies to go by. But in the real world, you might not want to hear this, but when a rebrand is successful, there is also a wholesale changing personnel, right? It's like, we don't just have a new logo. We have, there's a new CFO and there's a new CEO and so, it'll be interesting to see if you go down that path, whether the right personnel, shifts, Actually, let me ask you a personal question. Do you like being CEO of Fantom?
That's a really good question. But before I answer the question, I just want to address what you just said. So just to be clear to people, this talk about a rebranding internally has been kind of going on for quite some time now, right? And it definitely predates the more recent incidents happened with Multichain, right? So there's not a reaction at all into what happened with Multichain. It's more about something that we've been discussing internally for a while now for a number of reasons, right? And such a rebrand, if it were to occur, wouldn't be around the newer technology that we're rolling out, right? So it wouldn't just be like a change in the marketing perception or the logo or the name and that sort of thing. It would be aligned with actual like major changes to the technology, even if we don't hard forward the technology that I just mentioned, right? And we have been looking at a number of different use cases and talking to different well-known people in the crypto industry about it and sort of their ideas. We've been taking inspiration from other successful rebrands in the past and other rebrands that haven't been successful. I mean, some of the rebrands that have been successful, have been like, for example, Matic going to Polygon, or Haven becoming synthetic network token, amongst others. So we're definitely like looking at it as well and seeing what they did right and what they didn't do wrong, and the similarities and differences with the Fantom situation. Now, to answer your personal question about do I like being CEO? I like aspects of it and I don't like aspects of it, right? So the aspects that I do like about it is seeing like good results or like a good development, right? Releasing some great new technology, having a quote unquote like great project deploy on Fantom, and you get to see like a lot of users happening, and you see the positive developments on chain, and that's something that you can take like personal pride in, I think, right? Because as a CEO, you're supposed to be leading the organization, right? And so that means that you have to take credit, but also responsibility for things, right? So obviously, when good things happen, you feel great because you're like, I'm the CEO of this organization or, this project. Good things have been happening, and I played some sort of role in it, right? Now, maybe I didn't play a direct role in that, I didn't build the technology or whatever, but I still led the organization, right? But at the same time, on the flip side, when something bad happens, say what happened with like Multichain or other things, you kind of feel bad because you're like, okay, I'm the CEO of this organization. Something not great happened, and I got to like take responsibility for it as like a leader, right? And so, definitely when the Multichain thing happened, and I already had like, interviews planned, I wanted to talk about other stuff. I wanted to talk about, the more positive developments that were happening on Fantom. But then Multichain happened, and so naturally with these interviews, people wanted to ask me about the Multichain situation, and those weren't really like comfortable interviews, obviously, right? It's not a comfortable topic to talk about. A lot of people, unfortunately, have suffered and been negatively affected by what happened with Multichain. And for that, it's hard to deal with and to address and to publicly address it, go out there and, answer people's questions about it as best you can and to basically just talk about it, right? And of course, you get like a lot of flack for it, which I just, have to accept, given my position and I sympathize with people, who've lost a lot of money. And I personally lost quite a bit of money too, right? But, there's good aspects, there's bad aspects. The way I kind of think about it is that if someone is uncomfortable with their position, then they should just leave, right? So I'm not going to be, someone to be like, oh, people feel sorry for me. Oh my gosh, it's so bad that people say mean things or, that like Multichain happened or whatever and people getting angry at me. I just have to take it because that's my role. And if I can't take it, then I should just leave. And so if anybody can't take, the responsibilities that come with that role, then they should just leave. And that's my position, I think, with myself and anyone else that works at the Fantom Foundation. So, as with any job, there are good things about it, there are bad things about it. There are exciting things about it, there are really mundane, boring, regular stuff that you got to do that you don't really want to do, right? But on the whole, I enjoy it. I kind of threw myself into the deep end when I took in this role a couple of years ago. And I'm just going to try my best at doing it, right? And so long as people in the Fantom Foundation, the community, have confidence in me, I'm happy to continue with the role into the foreseeable future. Just to be clear, I don't have any other like third-party gigs. I don't have any consulting roles on the side, advisory roles on the side. My only job is at Fantom. And then other people in the past have approached me about like being an advisor or being a GP or in certain funds or being a consultant and that sort of thing. And I've always declined that because I think it's very, very important that my role at Fantom it isn't conflicted, that my my interests align with the success of the Fantom platform and the Fantom Foundation. And that's the way that I think it should be, and that's the way that it will continue as long as I like maintain my current role.
Michael, I had no intention of asking you that question. It just kind of popped into my mind when we were talking about the rebrand. But I'm really happy that I did, because I've never seen that side of you. Like, being a leader in an organization is really fucking hard. Yeah. And just to see you kind of describe that, I've never heard you talk like that way before. And it's very important that you did. I make mistakes all the time. I've been involved in businesses that haven't worked. I've lost tons of money. The difference is that, outside of a dozen people that may be involved in that deal, no one ever hears about it and no one will ever hear about it. When something goes wrong with Fantom, or any of these other big, organizations, you have thousands of people that are pissed at you, even if it's not your fault. And I'm in the Fantom Foundation Telegram group, and it's kind of calmed down now. But when all of this was popping off, there was some horrendous things that were being said in there about yourself, about others. Public figures face this stuff all the time, and I'm really encouraged to hear you speak with confidence about, this is my job, it's my responsibility. I've got to take the good with the bad, but I'm in the arena and I'm here for the fight. That's what you want to see in a CEO. So I certainly encourage you to retain that mindset as you kind of try and work these things out. But, you know, I certainly don't envy your position. It's hard enough running private companies where I'm not accountable to anyone other than myself and my employees, and maybe a couple of minority shareholders. Whereas, you know, unfortunately, guys like you, Andre, anyone else in the public arena has to be accountable to everyone, and that must be a really, really difficult environment to make good decisions in. And to those of you listening, like, just think about that next time, you know, you try and attack someone online for XYZ. Anyway, enough of that.
If I could just make sorry,
yeah,
final comment about that. Yeah, I do appreciate your words and the question that you asked me. The final thing I just add to it is that, you know, I think like Andre and myself and other people on the team, you know, we've accepted the responsibility of our roles, right? And so, you know, we're aware of, like, you know, the good and the bad associated with it, or I guess like the positives and the negatives about it. And so, you know, we fully accept it. So even though, you know, there are, you know, some people, you know, on the internet, whatever, you know, don't say nice things about myself, don't say nice things about like other people, some of which are like completely unfounded and actually like have no basis in fact. You know, I just have to accept that that's just the way that like people talk and operate, particularly when it comes to the internet. And so, you know, I don't, you know, hold like necessarily like grudges against like, you know, particular like anons on the internet or whatever. And I know it's not just like a crypto thing where like people say mean stuff on the internet. It's just like how the internet works in general. And, you know, I'm, you know, would just put up with it. And if I, you know, can't put up with it, I should not have the role that I have, is the way I see it.
Well said. Well said. Do you have a little bit more time? I've got 2 more questions.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned previously, maybe I didn't, I just want to clarify that you were talking about exactly what you were talking about, but you mentioned that there will be a test net around about October for FVM. Or is it for so for FVM, we'll be able to play with it in October?
Yes, exactly. So the newer technology that I've been talking about for a while, that's been led by Professor Bernard Schultz and his team, and also by another team based in the Czech Republic, run by really great like fan supporter called Jakob. We've already built the technology. Actually, it's fully running in a private testnet. So that's a new Fantom virtual machine, which is compatible with Solidity, right? So the way that you would write smart contracts will continue the same. It will just compile down into different code and run differently under the hood, right? And that's combined with a new storage system where we've dramatically reduced the storage footprint, you know, to a fraction of what it currently is for the Fantom mainnet, right? So some of the numbers that we're running privately internally is that we've been able to process more than 260 million gas per second, right? At more than 2.5K transactions per second, where 99% of those test transactions are related to smart contracts, right? And so this is a dramatic increase in the amount of throughput that the network can handle, while at the same time, the storage requirements for the network so far are about 1/30th in the private testnet, right? So it'll be a lot faster to set up a node. It'll be a lot easier to set up a node because there's so much less data that you have to worry about, right? And, you know, it'll be cheaper to run nodes as well, right? So all of the technology is fully operational, working in a testnet. We're just testing it further, you know, to make sure that, you know, it's secure because it is a major change. And we're also like trying to improve the performance as well as we go along, because we want to maximize the performance, obviously, as best as we can before we deploy in the mainnet. So the objective, talking to Bernard internally, is that we're looking at releasing a public testnet of this private testnet in October. And what that means is that people will be able to connect with the public testnet. They'll be able to submit transactions. They'll be able to play around with it, just like you can play around with like other public testnets that are out there, right? And deploy applications on it, and, you know, run nodes and connect to it and that sort of thing. So it will be this like public system that will be available out there. We'll run it for probably at least a couple of months. And if everything goes fine, we'll start rolling out the mainnet deployment, which will take a bit of time to fully run out because there are major changes. But that's sort of like the roadmap that we have in mind. And so the statistics so far for the new technology have kind of exceeded our expectations, which is great. So as long as the testing continues to go well, we should have a public testnet available from our private testnet sometime in October is the plan this year.
Yeah, so that's exciting. I'd be remiss if I didn't make this comment and ask the question. It's not necessarily my view, but there's been criticism, or at least commentary, not necessarily criticism, from the community around, the foundation being very focused on technological advancements, right? If we build it, they will come, that kind of pathway. And you've mentioned it a few times. We've got this, new storage system. There's SVM, and that should increase the performance of the network exponentially. I love using Fantom. Very fast, very cheap. For me, if it's cheaper and if it's faster, it doesn't really move the needle for me, right? Because it's already really fast and it's already really cheap. So what do you say to segments of the market that take the position that Fantom's got several problems and technical performance isn't one of them? Now, with the current backdrop, with these new performance improvements coming later this year, do you have a concern that won't move the needle for adoption because of the negative overhang? Or would you just anticipate that will dissipate as new developments happen and new programs roll out? How do you guys think about that? You're obviously aware of it. It's not like this is just some new idea.
So as I mentioned before, for any network to be successful, you need to achieve two things, right? You need to work on the supply side and the demand side. So on the supply side, as I mentioned before, it has to do with the technology, right? You got to be able to handle transactions. On the demand side, it's about users and protocols to actually have that sort of like traction on your network, right? So you kind of need both. I do definitely agree that I think on the technology development side, we've been more successful than on the business side overall, right? And I agree with overall people's sentiments about that, right? I think kind of like a factor that plays into it is that just personally, like Andre and myself come from a technology background, so we're always I'm genuinely personally excited about like technology developments, and maybe sometimes we've overlooked some like business developments, and that's why we're trying to like refocus on, okay, we need to solve the business development issues that I like mentioned, right? Even before like multi-chain. And, we talked about some sort of like initiatives and other ones that we might consider like going forward, like the Fantom Shark Tank idea, which I think is a very like nice idea just from my initial thoughts on it. And so what we need to do is kind of like work on both, right? But that being said, the technology development is still like really important because Fantom's technology, although as you mentioned, like it's kind of like fast and cheap, which is great. We had bottlenecks in the past, right? We had bottlenecks, right? Like in 2021, when there was like huge demand for certain protocols that were launching, and that caused a lot of issues and reputational issues for us as well, right? Users were the time to finality went down to like several seconds. The transaction fee spiked up a lot, that sort of thing. And there is no like layer 1, layer 2 project out there that can handle the like significant popularity or even like a single like really, really popular Web3 based application, right? I mean, you think about like the number of users that are using Facebook, that use Google, that use TikTok, that play a particular really, really popular game, right? The amount of like potential transactions that is happening or changes to persistent storage is significant, right? And if you want to have that level of users, that's not currently possible on any blockchain technology, including on Fantom, right? So if Fantom really wants to take off and have significant numbers of transactions, yes, it needs to get the users and the protocols and the popularity of those protocols enabled to achieve that. That's very true. But on the technology side, it's also equally important that it will be able to handle that capacity, because if we're not able to handle that capacity, then there's a limitation to how fast the network can grow. So for example, in like 2021, when obviously it was bull market and there were a lot of users, and including on Fantom and elsewhere, if Fantom theoretically had no limitations to its scalability, or we could handle any number of transactions and still process transactions with like 1 second time to finality or transaction confirmation time, I actually think the network would have grown quite substantially larger than it already did in 2021. The limitation clearly there was the technology, in my opinion. And so that is a very important problem that still needs to be solved. And, as we go into, better market conditions that I hope for in 2024 overall for, the blockchain industry, we need to take advantage of like newer demand that comes in, while at the same time also solving those business development problems that we talked about a lot as well. And also in terms of a developer, if you're able to, rely on the chain that can handle a lot of transactions, if your application gets popular, if you want to launch a node on the Fantom network, and then, and the cost of launching a node is substantially less than it was before, and it's a lot easier to set up, it's not quicker to set up and sync and to get running, and there are less problems with, being able to operate the node, that all leads to a much better development experience on the Fantom network. And so, it is also part of encouraging developers deploying Fantom to say, hey, currently running a node kind of takes a bit of effort, can take a long time to sync, etc. These new developments largely solve those problems. It's a lot easier for you to run nodes, to run your operations on Fantom network. It's a lot cheaper, and it can handle the capacity that is expected for your application. And so that's how the technology really is important for developers. And also, just about marketing, saying that, with this reliable technology out there that's proven, we want to put out, technical papers about it. And therefore, if you have a really popular application, you can rely on this network to be able to handle it. So the two of like the supply and demand kind of like go together.
Yeah, look, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you're thinking 12, 24, 36 months out, right? Yeah. You're thinking about the next wave of adoption, the next wave of users. They might be able to pull up an article about what happened with Multichain in May of 2023, but they may not care. I mean, pick a project. They've all got some kind of moment of crisis so far. So I think that makes sense, right? If you're building for what's to come, not for what currently exists, then I can see how, my position of, well, it's pretty cheap already and it's pretty fast. I don't really see the need, but I'm not a technical guy. But listening to you listening to you explain that, it wasn't a very complicated construct for me to get. So I certainly get where you're going with that. Last question, Michael, because I'm very conscious of your time. I know you're a busy guy. Circle, USDC, yesterday announced the integration with 6 more blockchains. Fantom wasn't on the list. I understand from previous conversations that you've had that, the foundation is actively working with Circle to integrate native USDC. I anticipate that those talks are ongoing. Don't really want to give, don't want to ask you to give specifics around when you think that's going to happen, but what I want to try and understand, and maybe this will be instructive for listeners and as well, is, what does that process look like for if you're a network and you want to do business with Circle and you want to have native USDC on your blockchain? What are the prerequisites? What do you like? How did that look like? How are those decisions made? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So you're right that we're talking to Circle. In fact, we've just talked to them much more recently as well, and not just going to be talking to them online, but also in person as well. And there's sort of like a process you kind of like have to go through, right? I don't really want to go into specific details about what that process is. My understanding, though, I can think more generally, is that I think Circle do want to expand to multiple chains, and I think it kind of makes sense from a business point of view. They want to be able to capture the growth. They want to be the dominant stable coin on a number of different chains, and it's kind of like an interesting strategic difference from what they're doing compared to say Tether, right? So Tether is obviously widely considered to be the number one competitor. It seems like Tether has reduced the number of chains. I think they announced 3 chains that they're no longer supporting, whereas it seems like USDC is taking the opposite position, right? Which is they want to be a popular stable coin on a number of different chains, and to do that they're going to have native issuance, right? one thing that is like interesting about the Fantom chain, which the Circle team is definitely aware about, is that before the multi-chain situation, we obviously had like USDC and like FUSDT, right? Or, the bridge version of USDC and USDT, right? And I don't know exactly the reasons why, but it seems like the bridge version of USDC was a lot more popular than USDT, right? I can't like remember like the ratios off the top of my head, but a lot more people were using USDC rather than USDT. And you could see that in terms of liquidity of the pools and just like how much was actually bridged over. And so it's very clear that the Fantom community already liked using USDC more than USDT. Again, I don't know exactly the reasons why, but definitely the demand is there. And so what we want to show to Circle and others is that there really is demand there. There really is a lot of people who want to use USDC. And as protocols, grow and develop and, want to use the stablecoin, they might be inclined to use USDC. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Just in light of the multi-chain situation, it would kind of make sense that, trying to get native USDC on chain would be, close to top of your list. So, I'd encourage you.
It's a priority for us. I think it's very, very important that we have some sort of like native stablecoin issuance, like in the end at some point.
Yeah. I'd love to know what that process looks like, but appreciate that you can't disclose it since you're in ongoing negotiations there. I got one, the last one. I wanted to ask this earlier, but I skipped past it in my list. I run a number of companies, and the way that I make decisions is I look around the room, I try and put smart people around me. I ask a question, I gather opinions, and then I make a call. Right? There's no governance, there's no voting. I'm the boss, so I make the decision. Very easy model to operate under. Now, none of my companies, are very big in terms of headcount, right? They're all sub 50 people. So I can afford to operate that way. Now, an organization like the Fantom Foundation or a publicly listed company or these large organizations, I don't have any experience in participating in or running. I've never had a job other than companies that I've started. So it's somewhat of a black box. Just from an investor standpoint, right? I'm a market participant. I might go out and buy Fantom at some point next month based on what we've discussed here and further developments. I'd like to understand how decisions get made at the foundation. Obviously, you're the CEO. You've got a team that's been there for a while. Andre is this larger-than-life character who, understands things that most of us don't. Tell us a little bit about how this group of individuals with varying skill sets makes decisions. Is it a fast thing? Is it by committee? How do you do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I like to divide the Fantom Foundation team in kind of like two broad camps, right? So there's like the marketing and BD camp, and then there's like the technology camp, right? So it first of all like depends on what kind of decision that we're talking about, right? Is it a marketing BD decision or is it a technology decision? When it comes to the technology decisions, we largely rely on the developers and their kind of like perspectives and opinions on things, right? Because we have a lot of trust in the development team. So, for example, like Bernard, when he's making decisions around like, okay, how do we improve the performance of the network? What do we work on in terms of the FEM or the storage I leave the technical decisions to the technology team, right? When it comes to like, release dates and, kind of like timelines and that sort of thing, that's a decision that, we consult with the technology teams about. And we don't really like to, negotiate with them or disagree with them and say, no, you must like release something faster, or earlier than that, just because we understand that, the technology needs to be done really, really well. And there can't be any faults with it whatsoever because there's a lot at stake here. And the results speak for themselves, right? I mean, the Fantom network has been stable for a very long time and continues to operate well. And I think is great technology, right? So we usually defer to timelines also to the Fantom development team. But ultimately those decisions would be made by myself and also the two other directors on board, right? So one of the other directors is Andre Cronje, as people know. But there's also a third director who's been involved with Fantom from the very, very beginning, more so on the banking and governance side, or called David Richardson, right? And so the three of us ultimately have to make decisions as directors, right? On the marketing and the BD side, we would also consult with the team about okay, what sort of ideas do you have? Let's bounce the ideas off one another. Let's take a vote. Let's figure out what people agree or disagree with, and kind of hash it out, right? And once it's kind of hashed out, myself, talking to Andre and David Richardson, we'll kind of make a decision about it and say, okay, this is a program we're going to run, or this is an initiative we're going to do. Let's be public about it, and let's just start executing, right? But it kind of also depends on the level of the major decision making, right? So obviously, if it's a major decision making to do with the technology, we're going to have a lot of discussions about it and have a kind of a director's decision about it. So, but if it's more incremental changes, release candidates, that sort of thing, we don't really have those discussions. We just trust the development team to put out those release candidates and make those improvements publicly known, right? We're aware of what's coming, that we just largely let the technology team do it, right? On the marketing and the BD side, if it's minor decisions about putting out regular tweets or updates, we just let the team do that, right? Because they understand what they can or cannot say for a variety of reasons, and they go ahead and put it out there, right? Or if it's small grass decisions, I sometimes just make the executive call myself and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just do it and just get it done, right? So it also depends on the importance of the decision, or how big of a decision that needs to be made, right? So there's no clear cut saying that, okay, I just go ahead and make the decision kind of unilaterally, using my, I guess authority as the CEO, versus we have a very in-depth discussion at the directors level. But that's sort of how the decisions are kind of made. There's, the technology team that I talk to, the BD marketing team that I talk to, directors that we work with, and yeah, that's sort of the landscape.
How, I'm just curious, how do you resolve dispute? So let's say you and Andre are on opposite sides of a debate and you both feel very strongly about something. Is Mr. Richardson the deciding vote? How do you guys navigate when you don't agree? Right? Because like you said, you don't make decisions unilaterally and when they're large. So how does that typically work in an organization like that?
Yeah. To be honest, we don't really have too many major disagreements quite often, but sometimes we do have some sort of disagreements, right? Say if it's between Andre and myself, we'll get the opinions of other people in the organization, right? And see what they have to say. And largely, they would give us sort of an opinion one way or the other, or kind of a modified opinion based on both what Andre and myself have been thinking about, right? And we'll go ahead and Andre and I would agree with them and say, okay, this is the decision we're going to make now, and go ahead and do it, right, based on the feedback. But there is David Richardson as well, and so because there's 3 directors, we also would get his opinion, and he can kind of make a decision as as another director and say, okay, based on what I've heard from either party, this is a decision that we need to make going forward. So that's usually how the process works. If Andre and I agree on something, we might just go ahead and do it, right? If we disagree on something, usually we spend a bit of time just kind of discussing it, and and also consulting the rest of the team about it. So that's usually how it works.
Yeah, typically just reasonable people usually get to the right decision fairly quickly. Especially if you get along.
Yeah, I mean, something that's very important in the Fantom Foundation team is that I think decisions have been made, based on reason, logic, and evidence when available, right? Because obviously there are always risks and rewards that are out there, and you can't predict every single outcome. But the decision that you make should be based on logic and evidence, and so that's how we kind of approach things, right? There were issues in the past about some people on the technology side or on the BD marketing side, where personalities clash. A lot of it has to do with ego rather than being based on logic and evidence. And those sorts of people didn't really last too long at the Fantom Foundation, right? So I like to say that a lot of the decisions that we make inside the Fantom Foundation, not necessarily driven by like ego, that sort of thing. We don't really have disputes between people that come down to, personalities. If there are disputes within the organization, a lot of it really comes down to like kind of the decision making, right? In terms of like, what is the best step going forward? Should we do A? Should we do B? Should we do C, or a modified version of it? So, and that's good, because in an organization, you always have disagreements from time to time, right? But you want those disagreements to be productive disagreements about the direction, about decision making. You never want them to be disagreements about personalities, right? That's something that I've really learned personally. So you don't want someone saying, oh, I don't like this guy because, how he acts or whatever, and therefore I'm just going to keep fighting with him. That's really, really unproductive. And that just brings down the whole morale of the organization. It kind of just like spreads like a virus internally. So yeah, you want disagreements.
Yeah, you're right.
But healthy disagreements, not unhealthy personality-driven disagreements. And I think within the Fantom Foundation, it's almost always, the healthy kind of disagreements that happen.
Yeah. Then there has to be a path to resolution. And once ego gets involved, logic gets thrown out the door, and there's no real path to that resolution if it's, people digging their heels in. So I'm glad I asked that question too. And hopefully it's instructive to the listeners about, how you particularly think about, how that organization runs. Let's end on a positive note. I want to know what you're most excited about that we haven't already talked about. We've talked about, FVM testnet in October. We're talking about potentially some new programs, some investments you might be looking at doing. Is there something that you'd like to emphasize in terms of your personal excitement? Could be a project that potentially has some exciting things coming up. But what are you looking forward to over the next 6 months?
Yeah, well, I what I'm really, really looking forward to is kind of like what we already discussed in the course. So that, a lot of these new technology developments coming to fruition and sort of like generating hype around it, and like interest back into like the Fantom ecosystem, particularly aligning that with sort of like better market conditions, shall we say, right? But in terms of like other things that we haven't really discussed so far on this podcast, there is like a very interesting project doing quite a bit in the whole life insurance policy, and they're looking at tokenizing whole life insurance policies on the Fantom network. And so I'm generally quite excited about it, because I think the insurance products on blockchains is a major use case that hasn't really like occurred before, right? And this would be kind of a unique use case like on the Fantom Foundation network. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to. Hope it happens like this year. I know the team personally and done a lot of development, and we've also put in $1 million of all life insurance policies with them, just to be like transparent about it. And we should see that sort of use case, I hope, like take off on chain. Be able to trade these policies, tokenize them, add a lot of liquidity to it, because a problem with these sorts of policies is sometimes it's not very liquid, but using blockchain technology to make it a lot more liquid, as well as audible and transparent on chain, I think is a lot of value add. So that's like a particular project that we haven't seen before deploying Fantom that I'm looking forward to.
That sounds awesome, especially with the current narrative around, real world assets finding themselves on chain. We've got, these T-bills are being tokenized. So for the first time in a really long time, you have some of these yields that are available on chain that are being derived in sustainable ways off chain.
Yeah,
kind of merging those two worlds. That seems to be a narrative that is really gaining a lot of traction, because it's pretty easy to understand. And I think, the concept that you're describing around these life insurance policies falls within that category. You guys should invest in that. You've got a front row seat, Michael, to all these amazing ideas. Oh, you already have?
We already have $1 million in whole life insurance policies with them. Yeah, just to be clear.
So just to understand, the same way that you could go and buy some tokens in one of these real estate tokenization platforms, and now you own that building. You've done the same thing where you guys own that policy. You own the insurance policy.
Yes, right. That's correct. So as I mentioned before, the Fantom Foundation is legally allowed to invest in like all sorts of like crypto and non-crypto based assets. So there's basically like no restrictions to it.
And where do the returns come from? Like, what happens if there's a claim? Like, how does that work? Do we have time just to quickly run me through the use case there?
Yeah. So I'm not going to like describe the whole mechanism, like all like life insurance works, like from my perspective, but essentially it's not just like a single claim, right? It's like an aggregate. It kind of like works how like typical insurance, right? You know, people will like pay premiums into those policies and you earn, you know, money from those payments made in. Yeah. So there's also the cash surrender value, which is like someone like surrenders a policy for a cash payment at a discount to like the value of like the policy. So like it's definitely like not owning like a single like whole life policy, like for obvious reasons. You know, people don't generally do that. But it's like an investment that covers like a whole multitude of whole life policies. So the earnings for the people who owns these policies is similar to like, you know, how someone issues like an insurance policy that's not like whole life. That kind of makes sense. But the way that whole life like kind of operates as opposed to term life insurance is quite interesting and very different. But yeah, I don't know if we have all the time to go through all those details.
No, that's awesome.
You're only yield from the payments that come in, and also these payments that are made into these whole life insurance policies are invested into other assets like, you know, bonds, etc., which also generate a return.
Because the insurance business is a fantastic business because you get to invest the float. It's a reason Buffett bought Geico all those decades ago. If you know how to invest the float, it is a fantastic business, but one that is not very attainable to most people. Like, you know, there's very few, you know, like it's not a business I could set up just because of the capital that you need. You've been a very large capital base. That's super interesting. Michael, you've been an absolute gentleman. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you, and you've been a really good sport with some of the questions that I tried to throw at you. I really wish you guys the best of luck. I think it's an uphill battle, but one that is certainly not insurmountable. I want you to let me know how I can help. And yeah, thanks for the time, man. It's been awesome.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks again, Nick, for reaching out and for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks.